Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. We are from Group BA1153D to present here macroeconomics issues in the United States. This presentation was prepared by Nurul Hidayah binti Muhammad Yusuf, Kristina Bilkis binti Kamal, Farus binti Muhammad Nur, and Nur Natasha Amelia binti Yusuf. Let's start with the content of this presentation. Firstly, we have the introduction. Secondly, summary of the macroeconomics issue in the United States of America. Third, discussion based on macroeconomics theories. And lastly, conclusion for the whole presentation. Start with the introduction. Definition of inflation. Inflation refers to the rise in the prices of most goods and services of daily or common use, such as food, clothing, housing, recreation, transport, consumer staples, and etc. Inflation measures the average price change in a basket of commodities and services over time. The opposite and rare fall in the price index of this basket of items is called deflation. Inflation is indicative of the decrease in the purchasing power of a unit of a country's currency. This is usually measured in percentage. Next, definition of unemployment. Unemployment is when someone could work and wants to work but is unable to find a suitable job. This means anyone without a job who is reaching out to contacts about jobs or applying to positions. Both unemployed and employed people make up the labor force or the subset of population that is both able and interested in working. Not included in the labor force are citizens not looking for jobs, for example, a stay-at-home mom, a college student, or a discouraged worker, someone who has stopped looking for work because they believe no work is available. Here we can see the summary of the economics in the United States. The US economy is still the largest and most important in the world. Despite facing domestic challenges along with a rapidly shifting global landscape, the US economy accounts for about 20% of global overall production, which is still greater than China's. In addition, the US has the sixth highest GDP per capita. According to the IMF PPP, there is a highly developed and technologically advanced service sector in the US economy, which accounts for around 80% of its production. In fields like technology, financial services, healthcare, and retail, the US economy is dominated by services-oriented businesses. Big US corporations also play an important role on the world stage. With more than a quarter of the Fortune Global 500 companies originating from the United States. Basic macroeconomics theory in the US. Here we can see in the first picture is the John Maynard Keynes. John Maynard Keynes published a book in 1936 called The General Theory of Employment, Interest, and Money, laying the groundwork for his legacy of the Keynesian theory economics, which is the first basic macroeconomic theory in the US. In the second picture, we could see Clark Warburton. In The Rise of Monetarism as an Ideology, Clark Warburton is one of the two basic economists that were most important contributors. Clark Warburton in 1945 has been identified as the first thinker to draft an empirically sound argument in favor of monetarism, which is the second basic macroeconomics theory in the US, monetaries. And lastly, New Classical and New Keynesian. New Classical and New Keynesian ideas can be coupled and referred to as New Classical synthesis, combining alternative views in economics, which are the third basic macroeconomics theory in the US. Let's look for the next slide, which is the explanation on Keynesian theory. Historical background. A book called The General Theory of Employment, Interest and Money was published by John Maynard Keynes in 1936, setting the groundwork for his Keynesian theory of economics legacy. Considering the dramatic adverse effects of the Great Depression, it was a fascinating time for economic speculation. Under Roosevelt and during World War II, Keynes' ideal played a part in public economic policy, becoming the dominant view in post-war Europe. Unemployment. Under the classical model, large and rigid real wages are frequently related to unemployment. There is more complexity than that. Keynes argues, especially that societies are highly resistant to wage cuts, and moreover, reducing wage will pose a major threat to the economy. Specifically, cutting wage decrease investment, which can lead to a downward spiral. Next is the monetarist background. Two particular economies were important contributors to the emergence of monetarism as a philosophy. In 1945, Clark Warburton was described as the first thinker to formulate an empirical sound case for monetarism. In a reaffirmation of the quantitative theory of currency, this was made more mainstream by Milton Friedman in 1956. Evidence. Monetarism, however, began to deviate further from Keynesian economics in the 70s and 80s. As more evidence for the monetarist view began to be created by active implementation and historical reflection, Jimmy Carter, for example, named Paul Volcker as the head of Federal Reserve in 1979, who in turn used the monetarist viewpoint to monitor inflation. Counter-arguments. As the argument started to emerge in 1980s, monetarist opponents became more popular. The Austrian school of thought is perhaps most well known of the new monetarist critics. Monetarism is viewed by the Austrian school of economic thought as quite narrow-minded, not effectively considering the subjectivity involved in capital valuation. Monetarism tends to presume the objective value of the economy's resources and the resulting effects of the supply-demand. Next are the alternative views. Background. As fresh data and new perspectives are considered, the history of various economic schools of thought has continually produced emerging economic theories. Classical economics and Keynesian economics, the two most well-known schools, have evolved to integrate new knowledge and ideas from each other and lesser-known economic schools, Chicago, Austrian, and etc. Economists have been inspired by these diverse viewpoints to create neoclassical and neo Keynesian perspective. The neoclassical viewpoint is referred to as the neoclassical synthesis and is largely known as the mainstream economy perspective in accordance with Keynesian ideas. Neoclassical. Individual optimize power and corporation maximize profit. People are going to try to get the best out of their cash, while businesses are going to try to spend their time and energy in order to catch their time and energy in order to catch the highest margin. Based on detailed and appropriate knowledge, people behave independently. People are affected by logical forces, mostly knowledge and logic, and based on this, they can make the best personal buying decision. Neo-Keynesian. Neo-Keynesian economics and New Keynesian economics are frequently confused, which attempts to provide microeconomics foundation to Keynesian views. particularly considering stagflation in 1970s, the formalization and coordination of things writing by several other economists is simply neo-Keynesian economics, most notable John Hicks, Franco Modigliani, and Paul Samuelson. Next, and lastly, the conclusion of this whole presentation. The study of macroeconomics gives us a perspective on the trends of large-scale social behaviors. Choices we make in the purchasing of products allow them to pass from manufacturing to individuals. As a result of layoff, budget shift trickle into economic condition of the US economy. Finally, increases in government taxation have a significant effect on the ability of corporations and individuals to work in the areas of finance. As seen, we can see that our personal economics and government economics are driven by macroeconomics. Personally, in my family home, one income exists. So, in all areas of spending, I find we can find ways of reducing our costs. We can see on a broad scale how these decreases in spending are compared to many other aspects of life: inflation, unemployment, industry, and etc. The gross domestic product can follow and calculate many of the societal patterns. And that is all from our presentation. Thank you for watching, and Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.